What's up guys, this is another PTS patch notes video, and today we're going to be going over pretty much everything that the previous videos did not cover. So the other previous videos took a look at the Elsweyr changes and the second page of the patch notes, which covered a couple of the base game changes but not all of them. And then the other ones were just the class update videos, so 5 videos on each of the 5 different classes obviously. And then this video is just going to be covering everything else that is relevant to PvE and maybe PvP as well. So it's going to be more combat oriented, not really taking a look at things like furnishings and animation fixes and things like that, unless of course they pertain to PvE. So I will have links in the description below to the other PTS patch note videos that I did. And again, I did this just because this patch notes was really long, so I decided to just break it up into more digestible chunks here. I'll also have a link in the description for the actual patch notes on the forum, so you guys can read that entirety at your own pace. So let's go ahead and get started. So we left things off with the Warden. Now we are going to look at weapons. So under the two-handed line, Cleave, they reworked this ability and its morph so the damage is increased by 50%, but they removed the bleed from this ability entirely. Carve will retain the bleed and they increase the bleed damage by 25%, but it will not grant minor heroism anymore. Brawler, they remove the bleed, they increase the shield granted from this morph by 100% at base, but reduce the bonus scaling per target hit from 100% to 50%. This means at base, this ability will be 100% stronger than before and will be approximately 14% stronger than previously if you get the maximum bonus. This is a very interesting change because of the increase. This is a really big buff to Cleave, which might make two-handed builds perform on par with dual-wield builds now. Uppercut, they reduce the damage dealt from this ability and its morph by 14% to make up for the removal of the post-global noted above. That you can find that in the first video that took a look at the Elsweyr and some of the other base game changes there. Basically, they made a couple of changes to the post-global cooldown for cast time abilities, so it's easier to weave. Note this results in a 6% overall DPS increase when used in quick succession. Now, in a true PvE environment, you will not be using uppercut in quick succession all the time. You will obviously be breaking that to recast dots and things like that. So overall, this might end up just being a wash, might be a slight DPS increase, but overall it should not change all too much. Under the one-handed shield, they just fixed an issue where using the one-handed shield hint was appearing when you weren't using him. Dual wield blade cloak, they fixed an issue with this ability and its morphs where you could fail to get the damage or any other bonuses provided. You will now always get the pulsing damage and any other bonuses, even if the major evasion fails to apply due to having a longer duration bonus existing. They also fixed an issue where these abilities were being treated both as a dot and as direct damage. They will now properly be treated as direct damage over time and scale with Thaumaturge rather than Master at Arms. This means they will also no longer proc things that state when dealing melee damage. For Deadly Cloak, they increased the damage of this morph by approximately 4%, so it properly gains 50% damage compared to the other morph. For Flurry, they increase the damage dealt from this ability and its morph by approximately 21% to ensure it is in line with other single target spambles. Hidden Blade, they remove the snare from this ability and its morph, they increase the damage of Flying Blade by 10%. Twin Slashes, they adjusted this ability and its morphs to follow their standardized damage over time rule set, so they increased the duration to 10 seconds, they increased the delay to 2 seconds from 1 second. They increased the damage per tick by approximately 15% to make up for the loss of the first tick. This will result in roughly the same overall DPS, but with less burst damage. For Blood Craze, they increased the heal per tick by approximately 27%, and fixed an issue where this ability was being calculated with bonuses as an offensive attack rather than in heal. And then finally, for Whirlwind, they increased the base damage of this ability and morphs by 50%, but removed the execute bonus. They reduced the base cost to 3510 from 3780. They increased the radius of this ability and the Whirling Death morph to 6 meters from 5 meters. Steel Tornado removed the execute bonus and further reduced the base cost to 3240. Whirling Blaze removed the reduced cost and major endurance on hit and reintroduced the execute bonus to this morph. So a lot of changes here. So Deadly Cloak, don't really see this being used too often in PvE anymore, but this is a buff overall to Deadly Cloak. And Flurry is a buff as well. It remains to be seen whether this is going to end up replacing other spammables, but I'll have to do some testing on the PTS to figure this out. Class spammables might end up being a little bit stronger, but again, testing will have to tease out this actual sort of difference here. Flying Blade, this is clearly a buff for PvE, but for PvP, I don't know if any of you guys use Hidden Blade for PvP, but if you do, then it's going to be a nerf because they removed the snare. Twin Slashes, they say it's going to be approximately the same DPS, so this should be a wash overall. And then for Whirlwind, Steel Tornado ended up being nerfed. So instead of running Steel Tornado now for AoE DPS, you're going to want to use Whirling Blades instead. So this does seem like it's going to be a buff to AoE DPS in PvE for trash pulls, and probably a buff to PvP perhaps. I'm not 100% certain on that, because again, this is kind of delving into the very limits of my PvP knowledge. So you might want to ask somebody else to clarify on that. Under the bow line, at Arrow Spray, they removed the snare from this ability and its morph, but increased their damage by approximately 27% and reduced the cost by approximately 13%. Acid Spray, they increased the damage over time by approximately 40%, but added a 1 second delay between the initial hit and the first tick. This ability now lasts 4 seconds in total. Bombard, this morph retains the snare and immobilize, but ensures that both apply to the enemy rather than only snaring enemies who were initially affected by the immobilization. Duration of the immobilize now lasts up to 4 seconds, up from 2. And Snipe, they reduced the cast time of this ability and its morphs to 1 second. They reduced the damage dealt by 25%. And they increased the travel speed of the arrow to put it in line with other projectiles. Lethal Arrow now applies Minor Defile. And then Focused Aim no longer increases the range in which your allies can hit the target. Instead reduces the cost by 5% and increases the range by 5 meters. Minor Fracture still remains. So overall for the bow line, Arrow Spray is going to be a buff. So for those bow builds that are running Acid Spray as an AoE or Bombard as an AoE for trash fights, it's going to be a buff overall. Snipe, it remains to be seen whether this is going to be a nerf or not. It seems like it's going to be a nerf though, because they did reduce the damage dealt to make up for that reduction post-global, but that is assuming that you're using it in quick succession, which might not be the case for bow builds in PvE. You might not necessarily be spamming it. You do have to cast other dots and other abilities, so it remains to be seen whether this is a buff or a nerf. Overall, this does seem to be a nerf. From the PvE side of things, now that Lethal Arrow applies Minor Defile rather than Major, that is an overall nerf. Destruction Staff, Wall of Frost, they reduced the snare potency of this ability and it's morphed to 40% from 60%. So Ice Warden snare builds are going to be a little bit less effective, so a nerf. The Restoration Staff, Panacea, this is the ultimate. The Lights Champion morph, this ability no longer grants major protection. In adjustment to this morph, the duration of the major force granted will now increase by 1 second for each rank of the morph, going from a duration of 5 seconds to 8 seconds at rank 4. This is generally speaking going to be a buff if you use this ability in 4-man content and in PvEP. Although you do end up losing that major protection, so it might end up being a wash. So for DPS, this is going to be a buff, but I'm not sure how this stands for PvP. This isn't really a ability you use all too often in PvE, mostly maybe in 4-man content, but this is generally speaking going to be a buff if you use this and it happens to hit a DPS. For Unarmed, fix an issue where heavy attacks while unarmed would not cause your pet to change targets. Under World skills, under the Soul Magic, Shatter Soul, they fixed an issue where the visual effects from this morph's explosion were multiplying in intensity based on how many enemies you hit with it. For Werewolves, Devour, corpses will now detonate a red glow. I guess it might be Designate with a red glow. You can now devour your friends to extend your werewolf transformation timer, and they fix an issue where Devour was not showing the interruptible telegraph to enemy players. Infectious Claw, they increased the damage of the initial hit of this ability and its morph by approximately 36% to put it in line with their AoE standards. So this is going to be a general buff to Werewolf DPS and PvE. In the Bleed, they adjusted this ability and its morph to follow their standardized damage over time rule set. Total duration was decreased to 4 seconds. They added a 1 second delay between the initial hit and the first tick. They decreased the damage per tick by approximately 15% for the base and Pack Leader morph. They increased the damage per tick by approximately 27% for the Berserker morph. These abilities can no longer refresh once they are applied to a target. So this seems like it'll be, generally speaking, a nerf perhaps to PvP. Again, this is kind of pushing against the limits of my knowledge for PvP. Somebody else more experienced can kind of touch upon that. From the PvE side of things, it might be better to run the Berserker morph now. We'll have to wait and see. I need to do some tests to see whether the additional Direwolf pets that you get from the Pack Leader morph end up doing more damage than the Berserker morph. So I'll have to kind of play around a little bit with the werewolves in the PTS to kind of see how this all stacks up. Under the guild skill lines, the Fighters Guild, Dawnbreaker increased the delay on the damage over time effect to 2 seconds from 1 second. Total duration is now 6 seconds rather than 5 seconds. Dawnbreaker of Smiting, the stun from this ability no longer ranks up from 1.5 seconds to 2.5 seconds. Instead, it is a flat 2 seconds at all ranks. This morph now progressively gets stronger in damage as it ranks up. Instead, this will result in a 5.7% initial hit damage increase and 9% damage over time portion increase. So this is a buff if you use Dawnbreaker of Smiting in PvP. Silver released, they improved the responsiveness of the pull speed from this ability to reduce situations where players were still CC'd after the pull was complete. Rat Beast, they fixed an issue where the initial hit could be dodged, and Turn Undead, they fixed an issue where this ability could only feel werewolves if you had the passive skill tracker enabled. So generally speaking, Fighter Skill, not much of a change for PvE, more for PvP, got a buff from Dawnbreaker of Smiting. Under the Psijic skill line, Accelerate, the increased duration of the Major Expedition buff from this ability and its morphs to 4 seconds from 3. Challenge duration will now last 12 rather than 9. Race Against Time, this morph no longer reduces the cost of sprinting by 50% for 4 seconds. Instead, it will grant immunity to snares and mobilizations for 4 seconds. Elemental Weapon, they fixed an issue where there wasn't an equal chance to apply each status effect. And Mend Wounds, they completely revamped this ability and its morphs. The light and heavy attacks no longer trigger the global cooldown and can be weaved with other abilities. They no longer cost resources to light or heavy attack with this ability toggled. Night attacks now instantly heal for the same amount that a light attack would damage an enemy. Heavy attacks still channel and heals every second, but has been reduced to the same scaling of other weapons' heavy attacks. It now restores magicka every time it successfully heals an ally. The Mend Spirit morph now applies its major ward and resolves the target healed for 5 seconds, regardless of whether it was a light or heavy attack. So generally speaking, it looks like Race Against Time is going to be the magicka kind of immunity to snares and mobilizations, so nice to see that there. Elemental Weapon is going to be a slight buff because it was applying chilled more often than burning and concussed, and now you'll be able to apply them both sort of more equally now. And the Mend Wounds is going to be very interesting. So last night when we were doing Sunspire, our Warden Healer and our Sword Healer were both playing around with the Mend Wounds, and it seems like it's working pretty decently well, but because of the way that it now scales, it might not necessarily be as strong as it once was. It remains to be seen how this is going to play out. I personally don't think it's going to be used all too often, but again, I don't really main healing, so I'd have to defer to other healers who have more experience to kind of play around with this ability here. Under the Alliance War skill tree, on the Assault line, Caltrops, the Razor Caltrop morph will no longer snare as enemy hit upon the initial hit. Instead, the initial hit deals as much damage as an instant cast AoE spammable ability. So this is a 350% damage increase for initial hit. And they adjusted the ability to follow their standardized damage over time rule set, so they added a 1 second delay between the initial hit and the first tick, and they increased the damage per tick by approximately 8% to make up for the loss of the first tick. This is going to be a buff for PvE. Anti-Cavalry Caltrops, they increased the duration to 15 seconds from 14 seconds instead. Definitely a buff for stamina DPS with this change to Razor Caltrops. Under support, they fixed a couple of issues with Guard. The transfer damage can no longer be mitigated a second time, but the transfer target's mitigation or damage reduction is now only mitigated once. The transfer damage is now correctly attributed to the attacker and no longer attributed to the initial target. It will no longer scale erroneously with initial target's damage bonuses. Transfer damage will now retain the same damage type as initial attack instead of always being physical damage, and Oblivion damage still cannot be transferred. So this is a nerf to Guard, both for PvP and PvE. So Guard as is right now, you get double mitigation, so it mitigates the person who has Guard active, so the person who is doing the guarding, and the second mitigation happens when the damage is received by the person who's getting guarded. Their mitigation is then taken into consideration, so it ends up being a very large reduction in damage from Guard. That being said, now that it only applied once rather than twice, it's still a pretty strong move for PvE. I'm not sure if double Guard is going to be a thing in PvP anymore because of this. It's still going to be pretty strong, don't get me wrong, but you'll no longer have a double mitigation now, so you won't have like a duo of basically invincible double Guards. Under the champion system, they reduced the maximum value of the Befouled to 35% from 55%. So this is going to affect PvP, not PvE. Now some other changes that they made here. So under consumables, they decreased the damage from the Oblivion enchant by 33%. Dubious Camarran Throne, Witchmother's Potent Brew, Artanium Takeaway Broth, and Clockwork Citrus Fillet were all nerfed. So Dubious Camarran Throne and Witchmothers their max health and max resource were reduced by 12%. Covers remained unchanged. For Artanium Takeaway Broth and Clockwork Citrus Fillet, the max health and max resource was reduced by 15%. So it does seem like this is a nerf. So you might end up needing to use Bystat in order to get an appreciable amount of health now for PvE trials. So I believe right now it is not quite 12 and 15% on PTS, so it remains to be seen how this is going to play out, but anticipate having to use potentially blue food to hit an appropriate health level, or you might need to put a few points into health now in order to get up to 17k health or so. They fixed an issue where a weapon enchants that dealt damage could be dodged when proc from a damage source that couldn't be dodged. Under weapons item sets, they've changed a couple of things here. They updated wording on a couple of sets to clarify their proc conditions, such as only triggering from healing allies or requiring a target. In Advanced Yokeda, they fixed issues where the set cannot proc off of abilities such as rapid strikes, so this is mainly sort of challenge abilities, I think. They added a 0.5 second internal cooldown from generating a stack, but they increased the duration to 6 seconds from 5 seconds. So this is going to affect stamina rotations a little bit here. So instead of 3 global cooldowns on the back bar, now you can do 4 global cooldowns. So now we can run trap on the back bar as well as the front bar. But this also means that if there's another ability that we can place on our front bar, we can now do that and not have to break up our back bar rotation. Kalurian's Legacy, they fixed an issue where certain elemental procs had a lower chance of being fired compared to others. Now it's an equal chance. Chokethorn, they fixed an issue where the set couldn't proc from healing of Meditate and other morphs. Pit Warder's Guile, they fixed an issue where the set would put an erroneous debuff on targets you hit with the set active. Daedric Trickery, they fixed an issue where each buff did not have an equal chance of proccing. Earthgore, this is a big change here. This item set now instantly dispels all negative effects rather than one, but the heal granted from the set now only heals a target with the lowest health in the area rather than the 6 lowest targets in the area. So kind of a mixed bag here. Definitely not going to be quite as strong for PvE healing or PvP healing, but now that they reintroduced dispelling all negative effects, it might still be used in PvP. But this is definitely not going to be used nearly as much in PvE now. Maybe on a tank because you're going to be proccing it on yourself more often, but it remains to be seen. I don't really see Earthcore being used on healers anymore for PvE. Essence Thief, they fixed an issue where the pool would fail to materialize if you began sprinting or dodge rolling while it was proccing. They also fixed an issue where targets other than the caster can see the Essence pool. Grace of Gloom, they fixed a tooltip error where the set stated it could only proc off of single target damage rather than any damage. Griffin's Ferocity, they fixed an issue where the set wasn't firing off of some specific direct damage attacks. Leeching Plate, they fixed an issue where the set damage could be blocked. Mechanical Acuity, they fixed an issue where the set wasn't firing off of some specific direct damage attacks. Nicholas, they fixed an issue where the set was not proc off of Shield Wall. Powerful Assault, they fixed an issue where this item set would trigger multiple times from a single cast of Caltrops or its morphs. Moments of the Hiss, they reduced the healing of the set by 20%, and they fixed an issue where the set was able to critically strike. Shield Breaker, they redesigned the set so it no longer deals damage when you light attack an enemy with a shield active, now increases damage dealt by 60% at all times. The effect is doubled when attacking targets with a damage shield active. Spell Strategist, they fixed an issue where this item set had reverted the cooldown to 5 seconds rather than 4 seconds. Swarm Mother, they adjusted the pull from this set to be in line with other pull abilities. Now this item set will pull targets between 8 and 22 meters rather than 5 and 28 meters. Then they fixed an issue where the set could go on cooldown after attempting to pull a crowd control immune target. Twilight Remedy, they fixed an issue where activating your own synergy would proc it, and Valken Scorer, the proc from this item set, will now display a ringer on the target when it is incoming to improve the clarity of the threat. Now for the PvP stuff, I'm just going to cover this. Everything else here is pretty much just sort of animations and doesn't really affect combat too much. For PvP in general, they updated the visuals for guards and generals to more clearly enforce differences in alliance. Melee guards will no longer use bash or power bash. The kill 20 quest board now includes kill 20 necromancers, and there is no longer a double confirmation window when entering Cyrodiil. For BGs, they fixed an issue where your character could get killed while in a playable area in Mor Khazurg. Keeps in structures, the roof of cathedral type keeps can no longer be destroyed. So Blood Maiden is like a cathedral style keep, so you can't destroy the roof anymore. Towers can no longer be destroyed. And for siege and damage in CP enabled campaigns will now hit approximately 30% harder than prior update adjustments. Damage in no CP campaigns remains the same. So that pretty much covers it for all the PTS patch notes. Again, links in the description below to the rest of the patch notes divided up by class, and then Elsweyr and some other base game changes as well. And then of course there's also a link to the full patch notes so you can read everything in its entirety. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.